Hello and welcome to China Tonight. I'm Stan Grant. On the program, COVID outbreaks tests China's resolve to maintain zero case targets. And what does a TikTok trend have to do with national security?
今天的午餐饺子，
But first tonight, what are people talking about on the platforms they use, Weibo and WeChat? Joining me is Yvonne Yong. And Yvonne, people were fired up about the call at the National People's Congress to have more children.
Yes, the biggest event of the political calendar in China took place in Beijing, and concerns about the falling birth rate was high on the agenda.
积极应对人口老龄化。
It was only last year government introduced a three-child policy in an effort to boost the population. Suggestions put forward this week included extending the reach of parental leave, reducing taxes on families with newborns, and a complete lifting of birth restrictions. The response from many online was one of anger. "Don't talk about second or third child. I don't even want to have the first child," said this netizen in response. And this person said it works when both women and men have the same length of parental leave. But there was one suggestion in particular that got people talking.
Encourage postgraduate students and PhD students to get married and give birth.
How can you get married when you can't even finish a thesis?
And Yvonne, I spoke to Dr. Jieyu Liu from the China Institute at the University of London and asked how women in China are reacting to the push to have more children.
When the three-child policy was out last year, there are a lot of online bloggers expressing their anger about how the state wanted to manipulate women's bodies again. Yes, in general, I think a lot of women's response were very angry. Yeah, these younger generation born in the 1980s. I mean, sometimes the employers will directly ask them in the recruitment process whether they are going to have more children and whether sometimes ask them if they are married. So all these things, they were really express these concerns of the employer actually really expressed in these recruitment meetings.
What measures might work then to increase the birth rate?
In the urban areas, in the cities, all the people born in the 1980s, in the 1990s, they are predominantly only child. So they grew up in that environment. Now these new measures are actually targeting these generation. But since they themselves are the only child, so they are very much acclimatized to the only child culture. So a lot of the people I talk to in this cohort, they just don't see the culture urgency or the social urgency to have more babies. Yeah.
And how serious then are legislators in making changes in these areas?
I think some of the representatives are women themselves. They may be, I mean, there are some of their concerns are coming from to making the life of women easier. But I think from the state point of view, as there are a lot of the economic consequences behind the population aging, I think from the state perspective, I think that maybe the economic maybe is the ultimate, the push to deal with these aging issues in China.
And Stan, another item on the agenda at the National People's Congress was food security. Premier Li Keqiang said China will step up efforts to ensure supplies of grain and farmland.
各方面要共同努力，装满米袋子，充实菜篮子，把14亿多中国人的饭碗牢牢端在自己手中。
But it's not just on the production side where China faces food pressure. Since 2020, President Xi Jinping has been targeting food waste. New laws are now in place making it an offence to order too much food at a restaurant, and hugely popular eating videos on social media have been banned. Brendan Wan has the story.
They're known as Big Stomach Kings. And it's easy to see why. These internet stars post videos of themselves eating and drinking huge amounts of food. It's a trend known as mukbang.
Mukbang is a South Korean social media phenomenon about live stream videos of people eating, typically enormous quantities of food.
Hello， 我是胖仔。
Peng Zai, a farmer from Hebei province, is just one of many internet sensations known for their ability to eat and drink.
The people that make these videos are what we call micro-celebrities. Mukbang performers in China couldn't have tens of millions of followers before the crackdown in 2020.
Chinese internet celebrities famous for eating broadcasts are feeling the heat from authorities.
You see, it turns out these internet legends are at odds against the national push to end food waste and dining excesses in China. In 2020, President Xi Jinping issued a new directive to tackle food waste, which he described as shocking and distressing. He said waste was shameful and thriftiness was applaudable. And thus the reign of the big stomach kings was now over.
Platforms immediately self-censored, and a lot of the big stomach kings, at the threat of large fines, started to remove their videos.
China launched the Clean Your Plate campaign in 2013, and now an updated version is arriving.
The ban on mukbang videos is part of President Xi's resurrection of the Clean Plate campaign, designed to curb food waste. But the campaign sparked a flurry of ad hoc responses. One restaurant copped criticism for encouraging its customers to weigh themselves and offering them suggestions on what they should order based on their weight. Some restaurants in Wuhan started serving one less dish than the number of people at a table. Not wanting to be outdone, restaurants in Liaoning took it a step further, serving 2 fewer dishes. No, not the noodles! Wasteful marketing was targeted too. This video shows fans of a music idol program searching for QR codes inside milk bottles to gain extra votes. The show's final episode was cancelled after the video went viral. And even Colonel Sanders took a hit. A toy promotion at KFC sent some customers into a buying frenzy, leading to a boycott.
Chinese social media platforms and netizens actually respond really quickly now to government initiatives and changes in policy.
But the Clean Plate campaign strikes at the heart of Chinese dining culture. Ordering way too many dishes is a classic Chinese boss move. How else are you going to flaunt your wealth and generosity?
Everybody visit China, love Chinese banquet, but you also feel, oh, what a waste.
Professor Mark Wang is the director of the Centre for Contemporary Chinese Studies at the University of Melbourne. He's also an expert on food security in China. He says the government's focus on food waste isn't just about changing eating culture. It's about national security, pointing out the rise and fall of dynasties in China have historically been tied to famine.
Different generation, different dynasty, food security is the #1 top priority. Even today, even the communist China is the same.
And according to Professor Wang, while there's no immediate crisis, China does face some serious food security challenges. In 2020, when the renewed push began, China was experiencing severe flooding and soaring food prices, in particular pork, the staple meat for many.
Due to the rapid economic growth since 1978, when Deng Xiaoping came to power, food consumption, food demand have increased dramatically. #2 challenge is loss of farmland. Due to the rapid industrialization and urbanization. The third major challenge, I think, is farmers have no incentive to continue to do the farming. So many farmers migrate to the city looking for urban cash income job.
Last year, the central government included food security in its 5-year plan for the first time, and new anti-food waste laws came into effect. Restaurants now face steep fines for wasting food. And while cracking down on excessive eating videos might seem, well, excessive, memories of famine still linger for many Chinese. In the late 50s and early 60s, tens of millions of people died of starvation.
Like my mom, remember the famine years, and she won't waste any single grain food, nothing. But for young generation, they never know this famine is a food shortage. No, you are kidding. So that different generation have totally different attitude towards food security issues and also government policy.
And putting an end to overindulgent social media videos might also be good for Peng Zai's health.
And Brendan Wan joins me now. Brendan, it's interesting that we're seeing this big crackdown on food wastage because normally in China, it's one of these nose-to-tail cultures. You don't waste anything.
Yep, that's right. I mean, every time we always have food with the family, we'll never waste anything on the table. You know, this is always demonstrated when we're eating fish, for example, you know, like the eyeballs, the fish cheeks. My dad always told me that the fish ball was full of omega-3 that would make you, you know, really smart.
Well, it worked.
I don't think it didn't work, no. You have not seen the results of my VCE mathematics exams. That did not help me at all.
Now, food waste is one thing, but I know from experience one of the big issues when you're dining out is who gets to pay at the end of the night. And I've seen people fighting over who actually gets the honour to do that.
Yeah, exactly. The yumcha itself, when you ever go yumcha, the food's really just the prelude to the theatre of two old Chinese men fighting with their Visa cards, you know? Because, yeah, I mean, no one really wants, everyone's just putting up the front and no one really wants to give up the, you know, it's the pride. It's the, you gotta show that you can, you know, treat the other person.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, Brendan, thank you for that.
Thank you.
President Xi Jinping has made his strongest comments to date about the war in Ukraine.
According to Chinese state media, President Xi called for maximum restraint in Ukraine and said China is pained to see the flames of war reignited in Europe. China has also this week pledged to give around $1 million in humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Beijing has so far refused to condemn Russia's actions and hasn't called it an invasion. Now, reports have emerged that Russia has asked China for more assistance, including for military equipment, to aid its invasion of Ukraine. While the Chinese embassy in Washington said it hadn't heard of the request, White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has warned China not to help Russia evade punishment from global sanctions. Top US officials are now due to meet with their Chinese counterparts in Rome to discuss the conflict.
And comments from Australia's head of the Office of National Intelligence also prompted a sharp rebuke from Beijing.
Yes, speaking at the AFR Business Summit, Andrew Shearer suggested China's closer alignment with Russia will pose new threats to liberal democracies like Australia. He also said President Xi Jinping wants to dominate the Indo-Pacific region.
We see a leader who's really battening down and hardening his country for this struggle to overtake the United States as the world's leading power.
Well, China's foreign ministry said Mr. Shearer should mind his own business.
如果他有时间，还是多关心关心澳大利亚自己的事儿，关心关心美英澳三国，无视澳大利亚自身承担的防扩散义务，不顾地区国家和国际社会普遍反对。
Now, despite this, Australia's foreign minister met with China's new ambassador last week. It was the highest level meeting between the countries in 2 years.
It was a breakthrough meeting, but there were no concessions from either side. Maurice Payne told Ambassador Xiao Qian that Australia wanted a constructive relationship with China, but also set out Australia's position on a range of issues, including on human rights and free trade. In 2020, China's embassy made a list of 14 concessions it wanted from Australia. Mr. Xiao has described them as being a gross misunderstanding, but defended China's trade bans on Australian exports. After the meeting, China's embassy released a statement saying they hoped both sides would make joint efforts to push forward China-Australia relations along the right track.
There's been a big rise in the number of COVID cases in China over the weekend.
Indeed, more than 3,000 new cases were reported on Sunday, the most in more than 2 years, and double the number from the day before. China's grappling with multiple outbreaks, and some cities have been ordered into lockdown, including Shenzhen, home to more than 17 million people, Stan.
With so many outbreaks, is there any sign China might move away from its COVID zero strategy?
Not really. Chinese state media reported that Vice Premier Sun Chunlan said COVID-19 cases among the general public should be cleared in the shortest time possible. She called for resolute measures to put outbreaks under control.
And Hong Kong is now a global epicentre for the virus too.
To get a picture of just how severe Hong Kong's recent Omicron wave has been, take a look at this graph. Hong Kong's death rate has now eclipsed London's at the height of the British capital's outbreak. More than 3,000 people have died in the city in the last 3 months. With many hospitals overwhelmed, refrigerated shipping containers are being put to use by overburdened medical centres to store corpses. And this footage shows authorities rushing to build new facilities to treat and isolate COVID-19 patients.
Well, as we've heard, China plans to persist with its COVID-0 policy, but is it sustainable? Dr. Xi Chen is a public health scientist at the Yale School of Public Health and an adjunct professor at Peking University and joins me now. Dr. Chen, thanks for giving us your time. That is the big question, isn't it? COVID-0, is it sustainable?
The scale of transmission is higher and higher. So I think it's a higher and higher stake of decision making because the social cost is becoming higher. But in the foreseeable future, given the potential risk of overflowing healthcare system and disrupting the supply chains and the economy, so I think the government in China still believes that the benefit outweigh the cost. So the zero COVID policy will still be in place for the foreseeable future. Originally, it's called zero COVID. That means absolute zero. But with the transmissibility of the virus, they changed it to dynamic zero COVID. Dynamic means it's a gradual process.
And so does that mean that they can live with outbreaks like they're seeing in Hong Kong, for instance, right now, where we have increasing number of deaths, increasing hospitalisation? Is that what a dynamic COVID-0 looks like?
The bottom line is that they need to think about what are the maximum allowable pressure to the healthcare system, because unlike in Western countries, China's health system is very much hospital-centric. So there's a lack of hospital beds and the nurses, practitioners. So they have to consider about this.
It raises questions about vaccine too, doesn't it? And getting increasing number of vaccine shots, getting the booster shots to people, particularly the elderly. The number of people who are dying in Hong Kong, about 90% of those are people who are not fully vaccinated, not properly vaccinated. So where is China in trying to roll out the next phase of vaccination?
In China, unlike Western countries, the vaccination rate for older persons are lower. So this is also being the case in Hong Kong. So we already see a large number of hospitalization, overcrowded hospitals, excess deaths. There are still like 50 million older adults, meaning that for people above age 60, so they are not received the vaccine or only received one dose of vaccine. And from the statistics released by the scientists all over the world, if only one dose of vaccines or no vaccine being received, the death rate will still be very high.
Dr. Chen, does this not also reveal another vulnerability in China, and it's going to continue to be a vulnerability, and that is that it is an aging population?
Indeed, and with multiple conditions, diabetes, hypertension, that growth rate is very high in China, and there's almost no gatekeeper for health sector. So meaning that people are having no family doctors. So when they are ill, they have to go to the hospital. So it's very likely that they will crash the health system if too many people are infected and hospitalized.
So how does the government deal with this, given that it is a very centralised government system, decisions are made from Beijing and then filter out to the regions? You can't apply a one-size-fits-all to this. You can't have a centralised response to this, clearly.
We already see large debate within China between economists and public health specialists. The public health specialists would like to maintain the zero COVID for a very long time, but the economists already sending very big warning message about the hurting of the economy and the social costs. So I think the debate has been going on, and I think as far as I know, many scholars are trying to write report and doing some modeling about the potential scenarios after gradual reopening and trying to submit to the government officials.
I'm just wondering what sort of a forecast you have for China, given that Omicron has clearly been a game changer. We're going to see various variants of that into the future as well. And all the things you've outlined, the the disagreement or inability to reach a consistent approach to this, the difficulties in being able to deal with this at a policy level, the ageing population, the vaccination rates. What sort of a future does China face while it continues to pursue a zero COVID strategy?
The best strategy would be to still maintain some kind of zero COVID, like leave more room for some flexibility of the economic reopening, but at the same time prepare the healthcare system as well as the vaccination rate for the older persons. And another thing is very important. They also have to prepare psychologically for the general public, because the pressure of maintaining zero COVID policy is not only from the central government. If you talk to the general public, many of them still believe the government is catering to their safety and well-being. So that's why they are not prepared psychologically for the reopening.
Dr. Chen, just a final thought from you. Of course, we know that COVID originated in China. It has spread from there to other parts of the world, and we've all had to deal with it in various ways at different times. And I'm wondering, looking at what's happening in China now, whether there are lessons for the rest of the world, which is clearly still going to deal with COVID for some years to come.
I think there should be more room for scientists around the world to do analysis and debate on what's going on and how to better prepare for the future. I think just in the last couple of days, China CDC chief George Gao his team was issuing another report, like using some of the blood test sample right after the Wuhan outbreak to show the any evidence about the animal to human transmissions. I think we need such kind of evidence more and more coming out to suggest whether there was something wrong at the beginning of the pandemic. And also, I think so far the blood tests are restricted to since after January the 1st, 2020. If we can trace back to the blood samples even earlier, that will get us closer to the origin of the virus.
Dr. Chen, thank you again for giving us your time. Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
And finally tonight, China has a rich musical history. In fact, it's estimated that up to 40 million children are learning to play the piano in China alone, a trend that has exploded since the Cultural Revolution. Annie Louie has the story.
It sounds like a cliche, Chinese kids playing piano. But for me, I started learning in grade 1 and practiced constantly for 10 years after that, in between violin lessons, of course. Still got it. And of course, I'm not the only piano prodigy among the diaspora.
I started piano at the age of 6. It was kind of like a phenomenon in China because parents tend to take their children to instrumental lessons at a very young age.
Andy Deng recently graduated from the Conservatorium of Music in Sydney, but he grew up in Chengdu, where he took his lessons very seriously, practicing 3 to 4 hours a day.
Part of the reason parents take their kids to piano lessons is for competition. When you go to a school, in a class, there are so many students, like 40 or 50 students. And parents will always talk to each other when they're at school, picking up their kids, saying like, my kid just passed piano grade 8, and how about your kid?
Piano has a long history came to China. We can go back to 1601. When the missionaries come to Beijing to see the emperor, right? So then they brought the emperor some gifts. And one of the gifts is called clavichord. Clavichord is like a keyboard instrument. And I would say from there on, the Ming emperor and later the different emperors in Qing just fascinated by Western music.
1, 2, 3.
Jin Dongcai is the director of the US-China Music Institute and professor of music at Bard College in New York. He grew up during the Cultural Revolution.
When the Cultural Revolution started, basically anything foreign, anything old were forbidden. Just one day, my best friend called me. He said, Jindong, let's come to my home. I want to show you something. And he lowered the curtain because he didn't want anyone to know what we were doing. And then he showed me this gramophone machine. So that's my first time listening to a Beethoven symphony. It's made a lasting impression on me.
At the time, instruments like the piano were symbols of Western ideals. In fact, it's been reported that Chairman Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, described them as black boxes in which the notes rattled about like the bones of the bourgeoisie. But things changed when local musicians found a way to keep the Communist Party happy.
So this pianist, in Chengzong, he played revolutionary songs on the piano. And he even took the piano onto Tiananmen Square to play. And that really made lots of curiosity for people. Say, wow, look at this. And the pianist playing the revolutionary song. Then that's, he demonstrated to say, okay, this is just an instrument. An instrument can serve the revolutionary purpose.
And just like Western instruments have found a home inside China, traditional Chinese instruments have found a home outside the country, becoming a popular way for the diaspora to reconnect with their culture. You might have seen Wei Shanshen busking on the banks of the Yarra at some point over the past decade.
Everyone knows who my grandpa is, which is quite amazing. So if I mention this 2-string Chinese instrument, they always oh my God, it's always that guy.
That instrument is the erhu, or Chinese violin, and it's a skill he picked up while working in a factory in Shanghai.
中国的乐器也很多，有古筝，有琵琶，这些呢都是比较在宫廷里面或者是高一等层次的人，家里边才有。但是二胡啊、笛子啊这些的，所以很简单，农民可以自己做，可以做出来自己玩。
It was his granddaughter who reignited his passion for playing when she asked him to teach her.
练习的时间啊，一般的说比较没有，不是很多，所以进步不是很快。那么就是他们提议，是不是能够参加那个80课？参加80课，他就一天大家都可以练了，一天起码有4个小时好练，那比较时间长的。所以那个雅拉日边上呢。 有许多听众都知道，我们主声党二胡一个节目，比较受欢迎的就是这样。我是有一个身份在这里的，我是中国人，我做事情应该要做得认真一点，要做得好一点。
While music is encouraged as an extracurricular activity, it might take a while for parents to accept it as a career path.
Chinese parents particularly ask your kids to play the violin, play the piano, but when you choose career, they will say, don't go to music.
Thankfully, I became a comedian rather than a musician, so my parents have nothing to worry about.
And Annie Louie joins me now. Annie, are you better at the violin than you are at the piano?
I think I'm definitely worse at the violin now. There was a section where I played a little bit, but I've decided to leave that out because the viewers, I shouldn't torture them like that.
Now, this desire to push children toward learning an instrument goes back a long way.
Yes, so there's an ancient concept of the 4 arts, or qin, qi, shu, hua, and that's how you become a Chinese scholar. So you've got to be good at these 4 things. So in terms of the first one, qin, it was originally a stringed instrument that you could play, but it could be referred to now as music in general. There's qi, which is a strategy game, kind of like chess. Then shu is the art of Chinese calligraphy, and hua, which is art. And that explains why my Chinese school as a kid also offered maths, but drawing lessons too.
Now, tell us about Lang Lang.
Lang Lang, if you haven't heard of Lang Lang, he is basically one of the most famous classical instrument players in modern times. He's from China, he's played at the Olympics, he's also been on the Jimmy Fallon Tonight Show and he's graced the cover of GQ magazine. So he's pretty cool and he makes the next generation want to learn the piano, I reckon. So he's going to inspire lots more children to take up the instrument for years to come.
Annie, thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
And that's all for this week. Next week on the show, Angga Radio takes us to the metaverse. I'm Stan Grant. Have a great week.